Drawing thumbnails is both for artists, I think, one of the most challenging things that we can do and one of the most important. The thumbnailing stage, the sketch stage, that initial kind of little drawing is really where I think a lot of the magic happens. I think in most cases, good drawings are planned, good illustrations are planned, and getting your own way of coming up with an idea in your head and turning it into something real on the page is a matter of you developing your own process. And for me, and from every sort of person that I've kind of seen recommend how to do illustration, all of that starts with the thumbnail, with this initial process. Now, your thumbnail can be big, it can be small, it can be rough, it can be ugly, it can be clean, it can be whatever. This is a matter of your particular process. It's how you get your ideas onto the page. And what I'm going to do in this video is continue part 2 of a series that I did. And the first one, we talked about the idea of drawing 20 thumbnails. This is a great ideation exercise. It's a great way to really get into the modality of doing a lot of ideas and sort of sifting through the things that are in your head. Now, often the question is, like, how do you figure out whether your idea is good? Often the first idea that you have is great. It works well. Sometimes you need to go digging, right? You need to really explore this. And especially when we're working in fields like concept design, often our goal is to really share that process with the team, the people we're working with. So we kind of often, depending on where you're working, you might need to finish your thumbnails off and present them. They might be rough, they might be sketchy. Like, a lot of this is a matter of what your process is and what sort of environment you're working with. And that defines the actual kind of final look of the thumbnail. But either way, I think this particular exercise that I was kind of talking about, where we draw 20 thumbnails and really push ourselves to come up with ideas, is a great way to kind of dust out your mental cobwebs, right? And really sort of push past and explore some different ways of being creative. Because once you do the first few thumbnails, we're often out of ideas. And then we got to go searching for how we come up with more. So that's really what this video is going to be about. If you haven't seen the previous one, I recommend you check it out, but you can certainly watch along here. And in this video, we're started to sort of, run out of ideas. And what we're going to do is try and plumb the depths and look at some different strategies and tools for how we can actually come up with those extra ideas at the end when, you're kind of out of ideas in the first place. Anyway, as usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is going to be a longer, laid back video. It's not going to be fast paced. It is not going to be heavily edited. Think of it more like a drawing lesson. It's just going to be chill. I'm going to take a pencil, I'm going to draw a bunch of thumbnails, talk to you about the thought processes and the strategies that I use as a professional artist when I'm doing thumbnails. So anyway, hopefully that sounds fun. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. If you want to learn more about illustration or picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. This charts my journey, going from someone who, really wasn't that good at drawing or art to becoming a professional artist, being published. I discuss topics such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to think about composition, creating thumbnails for your scenes, as well as a few ideas surrounding how to think about getting professional work. It's free and the link will be in the description, so if that's something you're interested in, go check it out. All right, here we are at the drawing table. Now, I just quickly want to go over the assignment in general, and also, we'll talk about a few frameworks and things that we can use to sort of go forward. Now, these are the previous sort of thumbnails that we had created, and I've got these 4, which were the sort of last 4 that we were working on. And here I have the 4 that were before that. So our brief is essentially a very sort of simple scenario. Just quickly, drawing tools for today. The drawing paper that I'm using is Strathmore 400 series smooth surface drawing paper. It is 130 GSM. Pretty decent paper for doing this kind of thing on. You can erase it and hack away at it. It'll hold up. Our brief is pretty simple. We have a warrior who is encountering a creature, a monster, an ogre, an orc, something, right? I've sort of chosen this little design, but we could change it to make it more interesting. That's something we'll talk about. The overall assignment is that we're doing our draw 20, right? We're creating 20 of these thumbnails. And as I was saying briefly in the introduction, the reason that I think this is important as an exercise is that it forces us to get good at ideating, to sort of practice just drawing a lot of thumbnails, and it will push your creativity. It will really challenge your ability to come up with good ideas. And especially if you haven't done this a lot, if you kind of run out of steam after 2 or 3 thumbnails, which is quite normal. This is, someone left a comment saying, like, I appreciate you talking about how much sort of effort this is. And man, this is serious work, right? If you're creating like a whole bunch of really sort of intellectually heavy thumbnails, right, which all of this will burn your brain, right? And I think it's really important to know how to manage your energy with this. But if you just sort of burn out after 2 or 3, often you do need to really marshal your energy and have some strategy and some structure. And we'll talk a little bit about different frameworks and sort of how we can sort of manage that complexity. So again, just going over briefly the brief, we're going to do 20. And what I've sort of given is some simple frameworks. The first is that we are really going to look at breaking this up into some different sections, right? We're doing 20, and that means we sort of got 4 sets of 5 is one way to think about it. Probably the first set are going to be generic. The second set are going to be like, okay, I'm going to start to employ some basic strategy. Like, what if the monster is big and the character's small? Or what if the character's big and the monster's small, like on the frame? What if we just sort of move things around? See what happens. This doesn't even have to be like that. You're just exploring, right? And this is often what we need to do. Because often that's what clients are after is sort of different options and things. The other thing to consider is that as we do this, probably we could have, divide the ideas up into 3, tranches of ideas. One would be just generic, right? As we talk about, this is often the first sort of set of things you do, generic ideas. The second set are going to be generic, plus we're going to try and put a little bit of a spin on it, right? Think of different camera angles or things you might not have seen. We haven't really done much of that yet. And then with the last set, we're really going to sort of go crazy and try and pick ideas and come up with ideas that probably we know aren't going to get picked, but are going to be very useful for the ideation process. So all of these things really do one simple thing for your creative process, which is that it takes the pressure off any one of these ideas being the one that, you have to choose, right? So when I'm working on, sketch 15 or whatever, I know that, hopefully I found at least one that's okay in that time, that I know like I've got one in the bag. So these are sort of bonus. But, when you're starting out and you are pushing into that sort of creative space, you're doing your sort of, first few things where you're trying to push it, that like, hey, I've got another 10, 15 to go. So this one I'm working on right now is not that important. As much as possible, we want to take off the pressure and all of those editing thoughts that occur when you're sitting down to draw and you start to do your thumbnail, right? Start to do it, and then it goes wrong. You know what I mean? It's not quite turning out as amazing or awesome or epic or whatever it is that you're imagining, and then you start to tense up because you're like, oh, this is not right. And I think just going like, well, this is not right, but I'm just going to explore this and see where it goes. I think that is the creative modality you want to be in. Creativity is fundamentally a sort of yes modality. We just, instead of going, oh, that's wrong, I'm like, yes, this is not what I had in mind, but it'll be interesting. Let's see where it goes. And we build positive momentum and the feeling that if you want to try something, you can do it and you're free. There's no judgment. There's no sense of what I'm doing right now is right or wrong. And that's, so doing 20 inspires, I think, that, which is the correct creative thought space to be in, which is we're collaborative, we're in brainstorming mode, anything goes and it's okay. You can relax, right? Any idea is good. That's what we want to develop as much as possible with pretty much all of your the creative stuff you do. This is where the flow will happen, etc. So these exercises where we do 20, and there's a lot of these exercises that you kind of find in traditional, sort of high-end education for, art and design, where, you have to draw. I mean, there's a classic sort of art center exercise, which is like draw 500 spaceships. And there's a bunch of these that you kind of hear about, right? And yeah, you have to draw 500. And there's, always stories of like that person who miscounted and they only did like 498 or something like that, and they failed, right? And that's it. You spend your $400,000 or however much it costs to go to art center now, and yeah, you fail because you miscounted. So this idea of like volume, I think, is a good creative place to be. Anyway, so we won't go too much into that because I have covered that in the previous video, but I just thought I'd sort of reiterate why I think 20 is so important. And as much as possible, I'm going to try and share that thought process with you here. So we came up with a couple of ideas of how we might frame it, and what we're also trying to think of is like give ourselves frameworks to work with. What things are going to be in this dungeon? What do these characters look like? Let's just sort of sketch that out and think about what things might be in the foreground, background, middle ground, like what kind of tools do we have? So I had a couple of interesting ideas that we sort of haven't plumbed, and this is the idea of like a fire pit or having other things in the environment that really sort of change the look of it. So there's a couple of little notes that I sort of wrote down to myself that I think will be kind of worth looking at as we progress. So I sort of thought, and this is kind of what I'll often do, is I sort of finish this and then I look at the thumbnails and then I sort of just make notes to myself, because otherwise I'll forget as I come back to this a few days later or the next day or whatever. So I'm like, we should do the fire pit thing. We really just need to work on that door. I haven't done that. And I need to play with the camera angle a bit. And I just had sort of, in my head, I sort of see some idea where, like, again, the character is, right, sort of leaning, is sort of on some sort of platform or something like that above the ogre. And I think one of the fundamental challenges with this whole thing, let's see if we can go zoomed in. Yeah, I mean, one of the fundamental challenges we probably are going to face is that, like, just because, like, if you're shooting this from a camera angle, right, and you imagine, okay, here's like the giant ogre, here's the character who's facing them, and this is where, again, thinking through these things, having in your mind strategies to understand like why things keep looking the same way. If we just have this and we're sort of thinking, let's just shoot camera angle right somewhere here. Again, it can be up, right? We can be looking up, we can be looking down or whatever. But the problem you sort of have is to sort of get them on frame, right? To get them both in the frame, we sort of have limited options because of the size variance between them. And so it's hard to kind of move things around without drastically changing the story. So the idea of being able to move the character around by still having them visible in the shot with the character below them means that I can sort of drastically move the characters around, right? Like ogre could be here, right? Does that make sense? As we frame the way that we're going to sort of shoot it and say, let's view it like drastically from above. The character is on some bit of the dungeon or whatever, and he's sort of come out, and there's like ogre down there. This allows us to drastically change the position of things and explore some different compositional ideas. And these are often the little blocks that we're faced with, is that, you know, when I'm sort of shooting this, because the character is so big, then it only sort of gives me a few options, right? So this is going to be like the main sort of option you tend to see. Anyway, so these are little sort of notes that I sort of had, and also I think on this one, I sort of had this little note to myself that, you know, we can really sort of play with the tunnel aspect of this, because I think that would be, yeah, that would be interesting. And also, like, you know, I was saying, we kind of need a roof, right? I think like adding a roof will add some sort of claustrophobia to it. So anyway, those are some rough concepts and rough ideas. Now, I think something that's good to do overall, something that's good to kind of play with, is when you're coming up with ideas. The actual danger here is that I would sort of just come up with some variations of this theme, because we're sort of fixed in this ideology. This is often what happens. And I could create maybe another 10 different versions of, like, here's a little character, here's the big character, and where they are. But what I want to do is really try and look at how do I explore different things. And now that we've only got sort of 10 left, we really need to think of, like, how are we going to spin these ideas off and actually say, hey, I'm going to be working on this idea and this idea and this idea as sort of different variations. So the ideas that I had that I think are, I guess, interesting is character is above. And this is where the framework that I think is good to use is get your pencil and write. You could certainly do little sketches as well if you're not sort of comfortable writing things. But we're going to think about this from an intellectual editing standpoint. We're not in creative modality anymore. We're out and we're in sort of brainstorming, more intellectual thought space. So character is above. I think it would be good to do a couple of things exploring that. Maybe there's like 3 in that. I also think the idea of the fire pit, right? I think there's probably 3 ideas there. And the other thing that's sort of worth looking at is, okay, they're in the dungeon. Like what is interesting about the dungeon? So start to think about, like how can we make this dangerous? Because there is a danger of it just looking kind of a bit mundane. So think about things that are going to make us feel that sense of danger, fear, and worry. So we've got fire. Now, I don't know whether these can actually be in there, but we could maybe, right, it could be lava. It's dark, right? It's like a labyrinth. Right? We're sort of trapped. I think also the idea of encountering. Oh, sorry, got that out there. Encountering a special room. So the idea that maybe this creature that they are kind of encountering is in some way sort of special, or there's sort of something special about them. That might be something that's worth looking at. So if we sort of take that, got a couple of shots we can try with character above. I really think this fire pit idea is something that we could explore a bit more. Oh, sorry, trying to get all that in frame. And when we're looking at the sort of dungeon, then I think, again, we can try maybe some where we've got some lava or some kind of fire. Other things that would normally work are like spikes. So, yeah, you can see we sort of got 6 ideas there. Got that, 7. We sort of tried the idea of dark, right? The fact that maybe the character would be hidden. I think we could try a few sort of ideas where we're making it clear that the character kind of doesn't know where they are, and maybe that it's sort of a surprise. And we've played a little bit with that, but maybe we could do that. And also I think, playing with some spikes might be an idea, right? Maybe a few ideas with a special room, and we've already sort of got plenty of things there that we need to play with. So I feel like maybe we have dealt with that idea of it's a labyrinth, right? Like some of these ideas are kind of there. And I want to sort of make sure we have roof and doors. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of making sure that all the ideas that I have sort of thought of I'm going to be able to sort of fit them in. Because often what happens is you do kind of grind away at this, and then at the end, we're kind of out of ideas. We didn't actually come up with any good ideas. So I'm going to do something else that I guess is important here. I'm going to set a timer, and we'll see how this sort of progresses. And I'm going to play with some different methods for creating. Let's go 6 minutes and see how that goes. Boom. So yeah, let's play with some different methods as well. I'll put that off screen because again, it's kind of distracting. But yeah, let's play with some different methods for creating thumbnails. So what are we? We're 15 minutes in and we've only just started drawing. Sorry guys. Again, let me know in the comments down below whether this sort of extra information helps. I think this is obviously, you know, the main sort of reason we would be doing this exercise is to think about the thought process, but I do realize that it's often more fun to watch me draw. So yeah, now I've put away that little sort of bit of paper and I've already forgotten what I was doing. So this is what we're doing. Let's try character above first. And again, this set of thumbnails here, this next sort of 5 really are going to be a matter of trying to come up with things that are a little bit of an unusual spin on this. I think something we could also try is design different character or monster. Something that we could play with. Oh man, that's really annoying. There's a little thing there. Okay. So I'm going to just play around with exploring. We'll turn that off. I'm going to play around with exploring without the frame. Or maybe what I often do is I kind of put a little frame down. And again, let's think about the idea of looking right above. So we have a character above, and then we have the monster sort of down below. And again, there's a wide variety of different things we could do here, but I feel like this might just be a sort of a cool little place to start. Well, maybe there's some kind of sword here. Now it's interesting, again, sort of reading the comments and, you know, the sort of things that people were sort of asking about stuff. There was a couple of interesting things that I thought were worth clarifying that probably are worth making a whole separate video on. And one of them was sort of talking about, you know, what is a thumbnail? I think that the general sort of TLDR was that these things that I'm drawing are more like sort of finished concept illustrations. And that, you know, in most cases, a thumbnail is something a lot rougher. And that, you know, the thumbnail is meant to be as big as your thumbnail. So I think there's a couple of interesting points there. When I'm referring to thumbnails, mostly I'm talking about in a professional environment. If you're just creating work for yourself, then you can really just do whatever you want. And if you look at, let's see if we can go up a bit closer. So if you're just doing your own thing, right? You can do it however you want. Frequently, if you look at the Draw With Me sessions that I have on the Drawing Codex YouTube channel here, what I'll typically do is just some little sketch, right? That's like, okay, yeah, like this kind of tells me, you know, this sort of gives me like a little idea of what I'm going to do. And as soon as I kind of have that, I'm done, right? And then I just sort of jump into the finish. And I sort of made a separate video talking about this, that there's many different ways that you can create sort of sketches and create your process, right? From, you know, creating these detailed plans to just kind of jumping in and essentially doing your thumbnail at full size on the finished board. And I talked about how, you know, I was often inspired by the late John Buscema's sort of attitude towards that, which is like, yeah, I do thumbnails. I do them, you know, on the final board before I finish the thing. And I think really, again, we can get stuck in the semantics of it, but the key is that what I'm sort of referring to is the thumbnail that we're typically dealing with in a professional environment. And often you do need to do quite a few of these, and often I would say they need to be as detailed as you possibly can make them. And I'll talk about why, because I think that is an important little distinction. Now, the reason why you include other people in your process in the first place, right? So let's just sort of cover that. Why do thumbnails? Why have this happen? Why not just, do your finished image and then just kind of, that's it. Typically what you find is, again, I mean, people are paying us money as artists to, so I'm not exactly sure what's happening with this guy. I'm sort of imagining this would kind of fade out, right? He's looking here. So yeah, that, we're working with people. The brief and the images that we're creating have needs, and we're working with, start that. Yeah, I haven't quite managed to get the time right. Yeah, we're often working with people and images that have needs. There are specific things that kind of need to happen, and we don't necessarily always get to know the specific reasons. And often it's important to include people in your process, because then they feel involved, they feel like they have ownership, and you're less likely to have them right at the end say, I don't like this. So if you can work with people and you're getting them to be involved in the creative process, then they have creative buy-in, and they understand that here's all the ideas we had in the beginning, here's how we progressed, here are the decisions we made. And I think often what happens is when you see the finished version of anything, often what happens is it's like, we're like, why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? People will typically want to explore different options, right? Because they'll see the finished thing and they'll be like, well, this doesn't quite do these things that we needed it to do. Now, the reality is that when you're working professionally and you're working on anything, often the reason that it doesn't do that, right? Like the reason that it doesn't do everything is because sometimes images can't do everything. Sometimes there are creative decisions that need to be made, and you kind of needed to make compromises. And someone who's not been involved in the creative process is not going to be aware of that. So typically, if you have someone who is, at quite a high level, who hasn't been involved in the creative process, and then they see the finished result, they're often going to say, well, why didn't you do this? Do it again, like do it properly. But if they have been part of the creative process, they're going to understand, like, oh yeah, this is why we tried that. We tried that in the thumbnail stage. We realized that wasn't actually where we wanted to go, because we realized this is more important. These are the creative decisions we made. And people feel bought in. They feel like, yes, we are a team. We're building this idea together. We've explored all the things. Someone will have a good idea, and then we do a thumbnail of it, and then they realize, yeah, that didn't work. and they see that it didn't work, and they're more bought in. And I think then you typically have a happier team, and you end up with a better product. And you don't have to end up redoing stuff quite as much. Now, that's the general reason why I think it's good to include people in the process. And this is why we have different stages of the process, and why we do, different things to help people, give us feedback, right? So we might have this thumbnail stage, right? Again, here, I feel like we really need something. It's not feeling quite dungeony, but anyway, I'm not sure how important that is. Yeah, so, we have the thumbnail phase, which kind of really helps us to, dial in the original idea. And then you might have a rough, which is a much more detailed version of a thumbnail. And then you might have, anything from like color rough to, sort of full scale, semi-finished drawing. Again, a lot of it depends on the process and who's involved, etc. But, and then frequently there's, here's the thing, it's almost finished. Do you have any ideas, any sort of last feedback? And the more of these you have, the more likely people are going to be able to give feedback and understand where you're going. They're going to feel ownership of it. And that's just going to sort of help in general, right? It's just one of those things from my experience. It really it really stops things coming back right at the end. Now, in terms of thumbnails, you might say, well, yeah, but this is just the ideation phase. Like, who cares? Well, if you're just dealing with art directors, then yeah, that's true. Let's see if we can add some extra stuff to this. Maybe some sort of movement or some kind of smoke or something like that. Yeah, if you're just dealing with art directors, we can all see sketches, right? We can all understand what's going on as artists and probably be like, oh yeah, that's cool. And also people who are schooled and visually literate and understanding the creative process will get that, hey, this is, this was just one idea out of many. Let's try another one here. This was just one idea out of many. You can never get the ultimate image, and good art directors will understand that artists need some creative freedom, some creative leniency, that, they're making the best decisions they can, blah, blah, blah. Not everyone is going to be like that. Not every artist, not every person you're working with is an artist. And a lot of the times, people will see the thumbnail and they don't really understand what it is, but they think it's kind of interesting. And we all sort of see different things when we have rough thumbnails. This is the problem. So it's very easy for someone who's not an experienced artist to okay a thumbnail and not really know what it is, right? Not really have a good understanding of what's actually going to happen with that thumbnail. And what you also have is, well, you say, well, maybe they'll just tell us at the next phase. Well, not always, right? Like often people don't tell us at the next phase. They will just kind of look at the next thing. And this is where maybe they actually think they're doing us a solid, because they will say, okay, we've got this artist and they're finishing off our illustration and it's not looking like the thumbnail, but I trust this person. I trust that, they're going to make it like the thumbnail. Maybe this is just their process. Maybe I don't understand, right? That they might actually be trying to be very, like allowing you a lot of freedom, and really thinking about, how to make you creatively involved. They often are quite, people who are not artists to still understand the creative process a little bit. They might be trying to do good by you. But still, what normally happens is if the thumbnail's not really clear, if it's vague and a little bit amorphous and someone else sees something different in it than you, is that right at the end of the process, when you've actually finished the whole thing, it's all done, it's all spoken for, you hand it up, and that's the point at which people will finally see it and they'll be like, that's not what I thought this was going to be. Can you change it? And that's when you run into major problems. And making the thumbnail as clear as possible, I think, is the best way you can have to make sure that this doesn't happen. Right? Like that's the bottom line. That the clearer the thumbnail, the better. So you can have whatever process you want for your illustration. You can do little blobby thumbnails. You can just sort of wing it. But the reality is that unless you're dealing with a client or someone who you have a really good personal, close working relationship with, it's going to be very challenging to, let's maybe see if we can put some other sort of evil characters in here. This might make it more interesting, right? Maybe the characters here. And again, this is totally not the brief. This is me just going off. Anyway, I just had that idea and I'm not sure what I was talking about. But yeah, so you'll be dealing with, the reason you want it to be clear is that it means that everyone is just fully understanding what the thing is going to look like. It's so simple. If it's your little thumbnail, if it's your little thing for your project, you can make it look like, let's see if we can get this a bit more in focus. Yeah, you can make it look like whatever you want. Totally fine. And you can just kind of dive in. But yeah, unless you have a really well explored creative relationship with someone who trusts your thumbnails and they trust your judgment, then you want to make sure that, yeah, you never hand up something that vague. And I think this is probably something that's worth its own sort of little video, but I can just sort of show you, like for instance, and I have a little book here that I'm sort of looking at, trying to find a good, yeah. So like here's an example of my, here's an example of sketches for Star Atlas Core, and you can see they're not good, right? This is the thumbnailing process that I use, and you can see they're very much probably more like sort of what that person was imagining when they were kind of saying, because again, I'm sort of talking about someone who was responding with a comment and saying, hey, you know, these are not thumbnails, right? These are sort of finished illustrations. These kind of things that I'm doing, these are sort of concept images. And maybe something like this is more like a thumbnail. So this is kind of often what I do if I'm just going really fast and I'm trying to sort of block things in for myself. But that's because I have a very good working relationship with the people who I work with on the Star Atlas Core graphic novel. And I know that they trust me, hopefully, and I know that if I sort of give them that we'll have a pretty good way of you know, dealing with the creative process that sort of turns out from those little sketches. So you can kind of make things look like whatever you want. Anything's fair game. But if you're talking about working professionally and doing this for concept design, which is kind of one of the main reasons I'm sort of making this, then you really do need to make sure that you can create these thumbnails and make sure the first thing you send people is very detailed, because it means that there's a lot of clarity. So often what's happening when we're working in concept design is that you're sending a bunch of thumbnails, right? If this is an illustration process, typically an illustration workflow is dealing with just an art director, right? There's often not a lot of other people kind of involved, but you know, frequently, you know, these things can still come back at you. But with concept design, often we'll be doing a whole bunch of these different ideas, and they're all going to go into a presentation. And we're going to try, if these were done, we'd scan them, right? Create this nice little presentation. We'd send those off, and those will be used by the art director who's working on the video game to say, hey, here's some ideas for this level we're creating. Here's some ideas for this boss encounter where our hero, you know, finally sees this giant mini boss or whatever that we've been working on, and here's how we're thinking it might look, right? And you know, there's going to be people in that team who are not artists, who like art but don't understand the creative process. There's going to be, you know, designers, people who are maybe on executive team. Huge variety of different people are going to be looking at that. And everyone needs to be able to look at it and, as I said, have a pretty clear understanding of what it is. If it's vague, then it really has little value, because it means that the art director can't really show people and get an accurate read on what they actually think. And as I said, typically what happens is, you know, you'll get this okayed, but then, you know, people, they didn't really understand what it was. So the clarity, I think, is super important with thumbnails. And I'm not saying this as in like Nina, like, you know, everything has to look sort of, you know, amazing. I'm saying that when I have handed up rough thumbnails, like was sort of being mentioned, that sort of look like those Star Atlas Core thumbnails, it has gone really, 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 really badly for me, and really badly for the project. And I can't recommend enough that you figure out a way to, at some point, make sure that the things you're presenting to clients or your team, that you at least have the ability to present really clean versions of those. It just solves so many problems to be able to do that. And that's sort of why I'm presenting them this way. The other thing to remember is, like, I've been doing this for a while, right? And I would say it's not just that I'm doing it for a while, it's that I kind of specialize in keyframe illustration. It's probably the number one primary competency that I have that people will tend to employ me for. So I've had a lot of experience. And in the beginning, when I was creating these kind of little, you know, derpy thumbnails, you know, they didn't look that good, you know, And insofar as, you might look at these, someone might look at these and say like, hey, these look very detailed, or whatever. A big part of that is just that, I spent a lot of time, so I can be spending, how long have we spent? We probably spent, still like 20 minutes or whatever. So I'm still spending longer than I should on these. But, say we sort of get to the, sort of 10-minute, 5-minute sort of range for these, because I've had so much experience doing these, mine are going to look, maybe like some of the drawing is a little bit better. I've drawn a lot of comics. I can draw pretty fast. This may not be something where, the ones that you're doing have that sort of level of drawing in the same amount of time. That's fine. It's not so much about quality of drawing. It's a matter of clarity. So again, just keep that in mind. Again, let me know in the comments down below whether that kind of makes sense. But I did note that comment was like sort of pretty harsh in the way it was kind of saying like, these are not thumbnails. This is something else. And from my experience, not only is this what would be expected from a deliverable, but in my experience, every time I have tried to do something like what was suggested, where you just do a rough little sketch, it has just gone unbelievably badly from a client interaction standpoint. And yeah, I have done that a lot. And the reason I say this is because my drawing typically, and one of the biggest challenges I had early on, was that my drawing was too rough and was not defined enough. And it was hard for me to do stuff clearly. And I suffered a lot for that. And I think my career suffered a lot from that. So anyway, just a couple of sort of points that I thought would be sort of worth underlining about like what is a thumbnail. I feel like there's probably a video in that into itself where I can organize my thoughts a little bit better. But bottom line, TLDR, if it's your thumbnail, if it's your thing that you're working on, it can look however you want. If you know your art director and they know your thumbnailing style, and you're working with a really good director, like I've known comic book people, like comic book editors and stuff, who can look at the worst thumbnails and be like, I know exactly what that is, right? They look at thumbnails and different people's thumbnails probably more than you do, because writers and editors of comic books are just looking at thumbnail sketches and stuff all day. So some people have a really good understanding of what you're doing, and they will understand that if you need to change it, you're the artist, you know what you're doing. Most people aren't like that though. Most people you work with, you need to show them a really clear vision for what you're going to do. And from my experience, the closer you can have the finished product look exactly like the thumbnail, the better from every metric that I can imagine. Like your happiness, the client's happiness, your career, like every single thing. So again, it doesn't have to be good drawing. It just has to be sort of clear, if that makes sense. And well presented, if that makes sense. So anyway, let me know if that's clear. All right, what are we doing here? I kind of like this one. It's not what we were sort of imagining, but again, that's the whole point. We're sort of pushing things. And here you can imagine, again, I've sort of done the basic ones. That's the whole point. The next is like, well, maybe we could make it cooler. Maybe we could add some extra sort of guys there, right? Like make this more dramatic. So imagining, in this case, the character is kind of looking at the frame, right? We got all these bloodthirsty goblin type people here, and here's our sort of big troll, right, going rah. Anyway, so yeah, simple idea. Let's see what else we can sort of deal with. I still think that above is a good idea, so I'd like to try some more that are sort of coming above. And I feel like I sort of like, this is where it can be really useful to just kind of draw without the frame, right? So I like the idea of maybe, right, there's these characters, put that in the middle, right? Maybe there's some characters here. Boom. And we've got some little sort of campfire where they're doing something. Again, if we were to sort of really ideate and go crazy, we could kind of say like maybe they're like cooking some kind of cow or horse or something like that. This is often what from what might be happening. Boom, boom. So just exploring, thinking about this, trying not to overthink it, but yeah, maybe a bit more. So show you sort of what it's looking like from above. Right, let's define the, right, think about, I often use a circle to kind of help me define the space a little bit more. And then, like, I like the idea of this sort of being in a space where maybe there are some interesting bits and pieces of the dungeon. Right, so it's something a little bit more formal. I'm just sort of building out the space, just ideating. Again, another perfectly reasonable way to create thumbnails. Right, maybe there would be more of these things. Back here, boom. Right. And something like that. Maybe right over here, we've got the same thing. Right, thinking about some space. Now, this is also where, like, you know, I'm sort of thinking about one thumbnail here, but I'm also kind of thinking about lots of different thumbnails that could sort of follow on from this. So thinking about the space can be useful. Again, maybe we've got some guy. I like the idea of these guys having like really big sort of noses. Not entirely set on what this design is going to look like. But yeah, maybe the character's got this sort of little pack, right, of stuff. Again, maybe you could, if you really wanted to get into the narrative sort of element of it, which again is perfectly, you know, fine. That's sort of one sort of way we could think of this. Maybe you could have like a little, right, a little herd of goats or something like that. So I'm going to try draw some, right, or cows. Right, so maybe there's like a bunch of cows over here. All right, little herd. He's taken underground, and he's just roasting one of them here. Maybe this can be like his sort of hacked up sword or whatever that's just kind of lying there. Right, so we've got some kind of backpacky thing here. Now again, you know, is this exactly what the brief said? Like, no. You know, but you know, sometimes, you know, just coming up with like, yeah, I think about this thing that's a bit messed up, you know, and then people really like that. You know, and that becomes something that's sort of worthwhile exploring. All right, so we got some sort of fire here. Anyway, I don't know what's going on. All right. So yeah, we got these things. Right, got the sword on the ground, and here, right, just kind of, just over here is our character. Let's zoom up a bit so we can see that a bit clearer. Running out, need to sharpen this pencil too. So our character has kind of got their sort of sort out. Boom, boom, boom. And yeah, so, and we would have here, right, we'd sort of have radiating shadows, which would be sort of interesting from a design point of view, right? Something sort of like, again, this is all super rough, right? Like none of this would actually, but worth thinking about. All right, so we've got our character here. And they've kind of climbed up on this. Again, how? Well, maybe let's just draw the thing here that they've kind of climbed up on, right? There's some rubble. Again, some other bits and pieces sort of fallen down. Who knows? All right. So how do you frame that? You know what I mean? How do you frame that? Interesting question, because we've sort of zoomed out a fair bit, but you know, you could either scan this and play around with it, but I think something a little bit sort of on this side might kind of work. Yeah, so I'll just sort of do it roughly. Now, this is where we're going to start to make things, right? You know, things are a bit hacked together. Things are a bit rough. Doing this kind of thing digitally, I think, is a lot easier. But yeah, it could be something like that. Boom. So, got some shadow back here. Shadow there. Some sort of shadow here. Right, this can be mostly in shadow. Not going to see much of the shadow there. All right, this would be sort of shadow. All right, sort of shadowed. Anyway, just as a rough idea. And probably have some kind of core shadow on these big spheres around there. But yeah, you know, could be something like that. So you can see this is like a lot rougher when we're sort of working this way, and often we need to refine things and make sure that we consider the frame we've got here. And it can be, you know, good to really, let's like really punch the frame. Again, if you're going to scan this, you might not want to punch it, because then you could move this border around. But here, yeah, let's really put an emphasis on where that thing starts and stops. So again, that might be an interesting idea. Just sort of allows us to change the frame a little bit more. Again, super vague. You'd probably have to talk through this one. You probably have to be like, hey, what about this? What about that? Yeah. And so here, you know, I can decide, okay, let's see what else we've got. I might swap pencil just because that's a bit... let's go with this one. Yeah, so maybe let's try a few here. Now, this is where I'm kind of fixated on this idea, but I really want to sort of move out a bit and go back to what we were sort of thinking about previously. So I'm going to try the fire pit thing last. That was something we had. But maybe we could try some different ideas for how we might maybe sort of deal with like expressing similar kind of ideas. Right, let's imagine we've got a couple of little frames here. Yeah, I like this idea of really playing up. I mean, we could play with the sort of pillars, right? Our kind of Lord of the Rings Moria style pillars, because that is a really good way. Sorry, we're totally in the wrong frame there. My apologies. Bump. Still getting used to this setup. Yeah, so we could play with the idea of there being maybe some kind of structure. Bump. That we can conceive of. And could sort of put these characters over here. Right, this allows us to check the size. In this case, what I might do is have the character kind of almost sneaking around this corner. All right, so we got sword there. Maybe they're holding up their light here. So I've got light against the darkness. Boom. And here. All right, boom. That would sort of be dark. So again, we sort of want to make it clear that got that there. So we can again do a little pass. I feel like that sort of works better. Let's go a bit zoomed up on this. Boom. I'm not sure about that pose. I think we could probably better express that idea if the character was really kind of pressed up. And maybe this hand is the one that is holding the torch. So I've got that hand holding torch here. And then right, maybe the sword is kind of coming across. Oh, like that. And that way it's a little bit more reasonable. And the other thing to consider is that the way you kind of think about light and dark and how important the light and the dark is really going to change depending on your medium. You know, like a lot of styles and processes and things really are going to lean into the need to kind of play with the lighting. You know, like where the light is going to be sort of really key. But again, here's the idea of him kind of coming through and then seeing. All right, let's add a few bits of foreground here to kind of punch out. All right, boom. All right, so we sort of see him, maybe like, so if there was a character there, that might be how big they would be. And this is where we can also look at some sort of bits of rubble on the ground, use that, and we tell the story of the ground plane. We tell the story of the depth there. Right, and as we go here, we can see some ogres or something in the distance. Now again, with this, I'm not going to define it that clearly, but again, maybe we have some sort of light behind them. So this character is kind of more in shadow because we're seeing the back of them, and this one here is sort of lit up. Let's make this stuff dark. Right, so that might be something that's kind of interesting. Again, it's like a lot of gap there, right? We sort of have this hole in the middle of our image. It's typically something you sort of don't want to do. But again, maybe we could play around with some other characters here. Right, maybe we could have even some other ones in the, this might help us play more. Right, have some sort of guards here. Right, maybe there's actually probably be good to play with depth here. Right. Got a couple of characters kind of standing here in the right, and that sort of mid-ground. So these are still pretty big. And right in the background, we got some other ones, right? Again, just playing around with different ideas. I feel like yeah, the challenge is to make it interesting, and I'll fill the frame with stuff. And this idea of it, the creature being quite distant, sort of interesting, but it's maybe a bit too much suspense. So again, let's look at how we could play with that. Again, trying to use some of these archway sort of motifs, but I like the idea of firstly there being, I guess let's go top. Firstly, I like the idea of right character being kind of behind a bunch of stuff. And I think finding a way to kind of add more structure to things. Right, boom. Is good. So to make it clear that there's dungeon and architecture involved. So I think here, again, thinking of something with a bit more movement. Right, so we've kind of got this character. Boom. And I'm not really sticking to that timer, but it does sort of help me to think about it a little bit. So again, maybe here we got not clean on that. I feel like I don't adequately have enough room to really sort of push the, see if we can go up here, to push the facial expressions. Boom. Yeah, maybe in this case, it's more like the character has kind of spotted us. And so I'm going to put this character much more in the center of that frame. So this would kind of be a little bit darker. This would kind of be lighter. I think if we place the character kind of here, similar to some of the other shots we've played around with. this is going to allow us to get more depth in there. Right? I really want to kind of push the depth and have it feel as if the space is quite extreme. So we kind of got this character kind of coming at us. And again, we can play that up with some speed lines and other sort of bits and pieces. So these are just little ideas. A couple of ones that took a bit more time, right? Like that last one. A couple of ideas here that just playing around with. And often when I'm doing this, you know, the way that I am normally working is just messing around. You know, I'll just kind of mess around a bunch, and I only sort of use a lot of these frameworks if I get into trouble, which is why it's good to have them. But yeah, let's think about... what is this character going to be doing? Just a little action pose or something. Again, I still like the idea of having a little torch. Because I think to me the torch says we're exploring, right? The torch says we're exploring. We just encountered this. And it gives us a bit of sort of time perspective. Because if he's still holding the torch, it means he's not sort of running for his life. He's not sort of that afraid. He's just kind of seen this. And it's like, oh no. So this is kind of silhouette. And here, again, let's punch this. Get an idea of the space. Again, that's not that straight. Boom. Yeah, cool. All right. So we've got some foreground. Getting blunt pencil again. Foreground. Right, this is in front of this. So we've got lots of layers now. And I think almost when you've got so many layers that like it's easy for you to forget how many layers you have, like that's the right amount. Because when we add atmospheric perspective, a lot of that will clarify. Right, so we've sort of got this in foreground, and this would be our sort of middle ground, and here we've got the background, and that really sort of helps solidify. And I think obviously as we work this up, this is where I think you could add stuff is, right, this is the kind of stuff that I think you can add is, you know, let's add a whole bunch of detail about what the architecture looks like. You know, like there's no architecture in any of this, it's just position. Got the backpack thingy on this guy. Bonk, bonk. Sword. Yeah, so I kind of like this. And again, you can kind of imagine this would be a little bit more sort of laid back, right? Like we're like, oh, what's back there? All right. So anyway, there's another 5. So I think that the things that I kind of, we sort of wanted to play around with that we sort of talked about were character above. And I think we kind of explored some different ideas there. You know, making many more characters, I think, kind of works. Let's get them all on frame so we can kind of see. Yeah, just a few more things. I think like really playing with this depth. That was something I wanted, like the sort of tunnel. I think like that is something that is a little bit different. This one, again, I feel like that was a bit of a fail in terms of exploring different ideas, mostly because I feel like, I mean, I should probably just do that now, right? I feel like these characters need to be a lot smaller, right? Like little goblin-y kind of characters here. That would be a bit more interesting. But again, this is a bit more of that sort of vague thumbnail that I feel like could go. This would go really badly because you just don't know. You don't really know what it is yet. It's not clear enough. But, you know, that's the sort of thing you can walk through, right? I thought it'd be good if we sort of had these in the background, right? Big kind of ogres there. And the other thing you can sort of do, right? Like this is where you have to know the situation and then what you're dealing with, right? But here we could sort of see, right? And see, here's a band of small goblins. And here, right? Right, large trolls in background. And you can kind of notate things, you know, like that's totally fine. Like that kind of stuff will work as well. Yeah, you know, so we got our 5, played with above, played with this idea of the tunnel, right? More parallax and feeling like we're in a dungeon or we're somewhere sort of enclosed. I think that was something I sort of wanted to hit. Again, I'm not sure where this came from, but I think it kind of worked all right. And yeah, so the things we'll tackle next is we've got 5 more. So I think the fire pit, really playing around with that is going to be useful. And I think also playing around with the idea of the fire, the lava, maybe some more sort of spikes and things like that. See if we can kind of push it a little bit further. And it might be good to kind of try one like that. So here you can see that through just brainstorming and doing a bit of tech stuff, I've kind of given myself some ideas and I don't feel quite as lost anymore. And what I need to pay attention to with the next 5, and I'll take a tiny little break before I kind of dive into that, is how do I kind of really push the ideas to the next level? And how do I sort of make sure that I'm just sort of plumbing all the depths and things that I initially sort of had as ideas? And you know, this is where I'll go back to these notes, you know, and sort of think about, okay, like what's here that I haven't really dealt with, right? I feel like we could play around more of this idea of this thing being on a dais or whatever. So I feel like actually at this point, I've got plenty of ideas and I think this should be fun. All right, we've got some sharpened pencils now, which is something we were sort of needing. Let's hit this this timer again. All right, 6 minutes, and see if we can sort of get a little bit closer to those kind of times. Now, yeah, I was just sort of looking at this. One of the things I felt was probably sort of good to try and emphasize with this one was just the fact that he is kind of sitting down, right? So I thought it would be good to just try and sort of put in a little bit of that sort of extra information there that might sort of help us with that. Again, super vague, but and obviously we could kind of play with that, right? If we were to work it up, we'd figure out what he's actually doing. The other thing that could be said about making sure that you do try and create a little bit more polish with these is that you do actually figure out a lot of stuff at the thumbnail phase. And I think that is something that's important to consider, is that, you know, if you do a good job at the thumbnail phase and you get signed off on it, then you get to think through what's happening here. So if you're just sort of doing these vague sketches, what you tend to find is we're not really thinking through in adequate clarity about what the idea is. And I think the more that you go to, you know, as far as you can with each stage, the more likely you are to kind of say, how can I make this better? If you just got a very rough sketch, then often what you're going to be struggling to do is figure out, you know, that the next stage is just going to be about clarifying the sketch. Whereas what we were talking about before, like, oh, maybe this guy is, right, like maybe we've got this character who's, right, he's roasting, he's like roasting cows, right, in a dungeon somewhere. You know, like how's he doing that? Let's think about the next level of idea there. You know, what's he holding? Like, what's he doing with it? What's surrounding him? there's a huge number of extra things we could add to that type of scene that would make it a lot more interesting. And if you just kind of have a vague idea in the beginning, what you're probably trying to do is just gonna, get to the next stage. But probably I'd want to be able to explore a lot of those different ideas there and sort of really think about, like, make it more interesting from a story point of view. So the further you go with your thumbnail, the more you can go with the next stage, the more you can go with the next stage. Again, the more you can explore these concepts. So detailed I think is good for many reasons. But again, detailed will be whatever it means for you. Okay, so let's try these things. And again, this always happens. Like literally 5 minutes later, I'm like, what was I going to do? So I think the fire pit is like an interesting idea. So again, we'll try just sort of coming up with some different ways to kind of think about this, right? But I feel like this is just a cool kind of idea that we could potentially use to make an interesting image out of. Right, so thinking about, let's go here. Thinking about, boom. And I'm just sort of drawing it from a pretty boring angle here. But what it's going to allow us to do is frame the characters against it. Right? Probably need to zoom up to really see what we're doing here. Torso, hips, arm, sword, right? And obviously we need to rework all our secondary forms and things to just make sure we got the right position for all those little things like bits of fire and stuff. But, right, looking at the back of the character here, right, sword is in front. Scabbard there. Again, just a little quick silhouette-y thing. Boom. Again, obviously we'd be looking at, right, shadows that come out this way. But this might be another sort of cool way to frame this idea. So in the background, right, like where do we see this guy? Again, I want to sort of also play with the design that we've got here. Again, thinking about some different ways to frame this. Again, could put the eyes in close. Could put them low. I mean, I think low is just sort of good. It is like that kind of the cave troll design. I just feel like it's such a, from Lord of the Rings, that's such a good design. There's so many reasons why that kind of really fits the feeling of this type of scale. But anyway, I'll play around with the face in a little bit, right? But yeah, maybe they could kind of be talking to each other or something. Again, let's think about where's the structure. We've got torso behind there. Right, that might be a leg here. Right, this guy's kind of creeping around. There's an arm here. Again, you might sort of be able to see him through there. So if that's where the sort of the shoulder is, shoulder over the other side is. All right, going to sort of come down here. And again, with some of these, I feel like, yeah, really, it's good to kind of leave some of them vague in terms of the design for my purposes. But yeah, you could easily run into trouble, as I said, doing that from a client perspective. Be like, what is that thing? It's like, well, I don't know. But often, yeah, it's good to sort of do a pass on that later, because sometimes, you know, it's hard to actually refine the design at the sketch phase. And if you have if you're doing this for yourself, and you have like a cool sort of vague little sketch, that way it can be fun to really think about, you know, what worked there, what didn't work there. You know, try a few different versions of it. But all these things are different creative options, right? You got to figure out sort of what works for you. All right, so I'm going to do one line here. And then try and break this down. All right, pit of fire. Or whatever. Now let's try and make it feel a bit more purposeful. I'm going to put a few little bits and pieces that feel like they are kind of surrounding it, so that it feels as if there is some reason for it. Now, I'm using the technique of just sort of drawing and seeing how big things get here. I think that can be a sort of really useful tool. But we can also mix up this idea. There's lots of different ways we can attack that. So I can try it here with no boundary, and I could either try and put in some foreground elements here, but I could also try this, which is where now I'm gonna crop the character quite a bit, because I think that sort of tells us how big they are. So that would be one of my first sort of instincts, is like, let's see right how they might fit in the frame. So you can see I'm not using any, there's no Fibonacci spirals. I'm not really using rule of thirds here. I'm just sort of doing this by eye. And this is where, you know, even though I think it's good to learn a lot of the rules of composition, you only really learn a lot of these things by actually playing around with it. And the best way to actually experiment and you know, find reasons and needs for these things is to look at doing 20, doing 100, doing 1,000, right? Putting in the miles, so that you have places to experiment and look at what might be a good time to play around with the concept of rule of thirds or Fibonacci spirals or whatever sort of stuff there is. But again, I'm just doing it by eye, because this is sort of how I like to do it, and I've done a lot of these. But you might want to, you know, think about, you know, where the rule of thirds are. You can see that, you know, I probably I've landed pretty close to, like, right, if you sort of think about sort of roughly rule of thirds, right? Like his face is kind of there, right? This guy's kind of on thirds, so we're not that far off. But you know, using the informal composition, right? Like trying to line things up, things that I have talked about. This will help if you're sitting there and you're not sure, you know, like where things go. Yeah, let's just see if we can think about, like, okay, like here's his sword. Where's his sword pointing? His sword is pointing here, right? Yeah, let's build some other directional things here that really kind of point us there, you know, and let's pick it up over here, right? Let's, because again, it's these little things that will allow us to, it gives us something to do, as opposed to me putting it in randomly. But in most cases, I'm just sort of doing it by eye. I think this also is another good thing to have here. Right, so this is where he is, got his sort of hand there. Again, I feel like this particular thing would need a whole nother, zoom up a little bit. This would need a whole nother pass to really kind of figure out what is going on, right? But I mean, I think it kind of adds something that the other ones sort of didn't have. Right, so we sort of have a finger here. Right, this guy, not sure what's happening there. Yeah. And boom, 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 boom. Yeah. Also, we got some lines here, so can play around with putting a few little bits and pieces around the joint. Although I do feel like maybe leaving that open would be good, right? Make it clear that the character is kind of entered through this direction. And also, another thing that I think is good to think about is, like, there's probably further we could go with this. And this is where I would play with that idea of, you know, keeping it sketchy versus, you know, sort of going in there and defining everything. Is that, you know, if you do find one version of an idea that maybe sort of is vague and kind of is working, then it can be good to kind of leave it vague and then do another one that's a little bit more refined. Or sort of, you know, if you're kind of at some point, this is where also doing 20 helps, right? If we're sort of at some point where we are, yeah, kind of reaching the limitations of the particular illustration we're working on, and basically it's like, well, I'm either going to push it in a different direction by like adding more detail or, you know, refining this pose. You know, I'm going to sort of go much more strongly in one direction. If it's kind of working and it's a little bit more vague, then it can be good to take it in that direction with a different sketch. Now, the way you can do this, if you are working digitally, is obviously a lot easier. You can just take this, right, and save it, and then just duplicate it, and then keep working. And this really is exactly the type of reason that digital stuff is so much better for professional work. You know, I could create 3 or 4 different versions of this, you know, with like a different pose here, different style of character, different shape of how, you know, how this particular little bit of fire or whatever is coming out of there. Yeah. Anyway, that's probably enough for now. Yeah, so that's kind of the point. It's coming out there. And I think, you know, having some lines on the ground, right, some sort of runes or something like that going around it might be cool as well. Make it clear that this is a space. Let's just have another go at pushing that line there. So the reason I often do chicken scratch when I'm doing that, right, when I'm doing these, is it's just it's going to give me a darker line, and it means I'm not going to accidentally go in there and ruin it all. Because often I'm sort of viewing this at a slightly different angle. So it's hard to draw a straight line perfectly. But anyway, that's sort of one. So we got 4 to go. We're going for quite a while. And this is often what happens, right? Again, I'm trying to sort of keep the times pretty reasonable, but yeah, sometimes you just kind of get sidetracked. So let's look at what else we can do. I think we can still play around with this fire pit idea. Let's look at using a much more low down angle. All right. Zoom up a bit. Boom. All right, so I really want to be like floor is here. Boom. Again, I like the idea of this arm, like it being a double wielded sword. Okay, also we could play around with some sort of cape or something like that. So this is like variation on that idea. Right, we've got the idea of a fire pit coming up here. And over here is this gigantic thing. So I keep sort of, I feel like chickening out with the nose. Yeah, not exactly sure what's going on with the face. And often from a creative standpoint, right? Like this is exactly how I will kind of play around with it, right? Like little vague lines, and then that sort of suggests something, and then I kind of try and put in a few little bits and pieces, and then I kind of ruin it, right, by going too far. But, you know, we can always try again. But I think the idea of having like a really kind of big, long sort of nose is very sort of classically 80s fantasy. So again, I kind of like the idea that this guy is sort of like almost too big for the space. Sort of like the previous one. Right? It's almost like they're sort of crawling around, which, you know, I think that sort of thing would be sort of cool as as like a video game. Let's give this guy some kind of armor and stuff. Maybe not armor. I don't know. Not really feeling that. So again, trying to go with that. Keep trying to mess with the pose, but I think just getting this big oval thing is sort of what I'm looking at. Just gonna go with hand here. that's holding something. And also making the character kind of duck underneath. Sort of makes it feel as if they're so big that in order to kind of get close to this guy, they're having to sit down. Right, like you need to crouch. When you're talking to like a small animal or something like that. Right? So, yeah, again, interesting. Got an arm there. Don't know what's happening there. All right, now here's where I sort of have this idea of there being the fire pit in between them, and there is this stuff here that we can really sort of lean into. Right, and again, sort of want some sense of ritual, or right. I'm going to try to be quicker with these last few. Right, sense of ritual. Boom. Right. Maybe there's some fire in these little pots or whatever. I feel like this pot needs to be bigger. It's kind of meant to be in the foreground. Let's get that, sorry, in focus. Anyway. So I've got a bit of a foreground there, but what I'll do again is try and crop here. That might not be exactly the best place to kind of crop above, but we'll see. And then let's do here and sort of here. Boom. There we go. Boom. And yeah, I'm angling my, again, the background is dark because dungeon. And I'm angling it at the same angle as all of these little bits of fire and stuff seem to go at. Just because that will give us a little bit of motion. And, you know, you can carry through those, you know, ideas of motion to the finished sort of image. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, and again, you know, we could have some more foreground elements or background elements or whatever, but you know, that's giving us a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now again, I feel like we could work this better. I like the idea that he's got some kind of helmet on or something like that. And he's got more of a little smirk. But plenty of scars. More scars everywhere. So again, super vague anatomy and stuff. But often, you know, that's sort of going to be enough. And a big part of, I guess, what this sort of idea is about is, yeah, really framing and giving us a solid sort of graphic image. So the more that I can make sure that we have, like, you know, foreground is dark, and there's a rationale for that. And here we got some cool drama with this big fire pit, right? Big sort of red, yellow, gold fire pit. We've got some motion that's giving us some angular ideas. Boom. Right, I could put some other little bits of fire and things floating in the background. Right, sort of it gives me a lot of options to think about the exact way that, you know, we could manipulate things to make it more interesting. Right, I've got tools with this type of image. So again, even though the thumbnail is maybe not as sort of detailed as it could be, you know, it's giving me a few little ideas there. But yeah, I do think we'd need to do another few passes on some of this anatomy. All right, so I feel like that's kind of a few of those fire pit things. I still like that sort of general idea, but I'm not necessarily sure that adding to it is going to help that much more. So I think it might be good to maybe combine it with another few ideas, like for instance, think about maybe we could play with making the character slightly more interesting, and also adding some other things, right? Like sort of the lava or spikes or typical things that might really kind of help to sell the idea of the dungeon. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, is like, how do we do these last few? But again, you know, I'm not necessarily sure that any of these are really like that good. You know, I haven't really been thinking about that. So it's always hard with these last few to, again, sort of know what to do with them. And that's where I'm sort of thinking like, yeah, it would be good to kind of go a little bit sort of crazier and, you know, really sort of play with it. But I feel like, you know, this is a little bit more crazy, right? Like this one is a little bit more like that. Yeah, but yeah, I did have a few interesting little ideas that we kind of might be worth playing with. Yeah, let's try one of those again. We'll just how are we going to frame it? How does that work? Let's see if we can do it quickly. We got do a 5-minute one. Yeah, so with this, I want sort of low horizon line. Got a character here. Let's try a bit lower. Horizon line is here, so I'm being super rough. Right, character is here. And then I did like the idea of this. Right. This idea of almost like the sort of the sleeping giant. We sort of played around with this with one of them. But this is an idea that a lot of these are video gamey kind of ideas. But I feel like here, low horizon. Boom. So you can see again in my head I have this sort of triangular thing, right, with that I think is like, look, I feel like it's always like a good go-to. I try with this sort of little mouth. Boom. I mean, I guess like the fundamental idea here is, you know, I think it's a fun thing to look at what would happen if we kind of encounter this character and you're kind of not quite sure whether or not it's a statue or whatever. That'd be good. Maybe we'll just do a few arms here. I always like the idea of multiple armed characters. So this is falling into one of the tropes that I frequently use with a lot of the sort of design I do, which is just character encounters strange creature. So we just have character in front of strange thing. But again, we're in the weird territory. We can do whatever, right? Like maybe, okay, let's put some tentacles on his back. All right, so here we got an arm here. Oh. All right, got an arm here. Got some fingers. Right, here we got an arm here on the ground. Do we need tentacles? Maybe I could put tentacles somewhere else. Got an arm here. Yeah, I think maybe let's put a little hand here. Right, boom. Right, so we sort of got shoulders here. And boom. Yeah, let's put this. So we still should be able to see the bottom of it. Let's put the thing he's holding here. Does it come down to? No, we've got a horizon line here, so I really want. It'd be good to use some other things to kind of sell that horizon line as well. Oh, I've only got 40 seconds left of this sketch. Boom, boom. Backpack guy. Now, what's he doing? Because often this will define the way that the characters kind of interact. Right, here's kind of the floor. Here's where. Right. We're dealing with things going out. So not as close as I would like. But maybe it's, yeah, again, maybe we could kind of make this a little bit less about the kind of warrior. Actually, I think what I need to do is move this arm up here, all right? Hand. So you can see these sketches are looking pretty rough. Boom, boom. Right, I like the idea that maybe it's kind of holding something. Oh, all right. I feel like it would be good to like sort of play around with this, but have it a bit more as if we're kind of looking up at it. So I probably need to frame this up, right? But I've kind of, right, I'm kind of, you know, there's no point in doing that because, you know, it's at the top. So probably, you know, I am going to want to frame it somewhere there. Right, and then somewhere here, just below. Maybe this can be like ultra wide. Now, horizon line is kind of there. So let's say we're kind of looking up at something here. We can try and tell the story of that horizon line and see if we can add in some other elements to help us define what's going on with that space. So super rough. But again, it's like not a thumbnail because it's a lot bigger, right? It's not the size of the thumbnail, but still being very sort of loose. And often I think this is important because often one of the most challenging things you deal with is kind of knowing how to get the angle right and how to fill in the right amount of stuff. So, you know, something that, for instance, I was told when I was working on feature film stuff was just to keep in mind how much actual real estate there is on a large screen. You know, so if I'm used to working on comics or card games, you know, we often have to be quite iconic, quite you know, subtle in the way that we, you know, leave space and make things clear, etc. I feel like that's not working. I feel like this needs to go straight up. Yeah, and I remember handing up some thumbnails exactly like this kind of stuff that I'm doing, and I think the art director just said, like, look, you need to put in way more detail, because, you know, you can see all that detail when you're working on, when you're looking at a finished feature film, right? It's not like TV. There's just so much room there. So that, again, you know, is just an example of how, you know, sometimes we're kind of thinking like a little bit small. You sort of zoom out, think about, you know, like here we've got a pretty widescreen look. Right, we're going outside the frame, and that's kind of helping us. Again, let's think about some rocks and debris, other ways that we might tell the story of what's going on here. Again. Right. Yeah. And you can see, you know, like this is a significantly larger endeavor than sort of what we have been looking at. So we're at the, so again, it took me a whole nother 5 minutes just to kind of get all of this stuff sorted. And it really does add a lot, right? This adds like a lot of fuss. It's a lot harder for me to put in all those extra little bits and pieces. Right, a lot harder for me to put in that tone. Yeah, let's see if we can punch in a bit of detail on this character. I'm going to need a new pencil. That one is fully, that's the end of that. But, you know, I think that there is something to be said for just, again, like, you know, drawing a bit bigger, drawing a bit smaller. You're going to come up with different ideas. You know, it can be very frustrating to be stuck in thumbnail land, right? And just being able to sort of loosen up, like do things a little bit bigger, sometimes can be what you need. Because there is a certain degree to where you're like, oh, I've got to do this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's good to like loosen up, right? Get a sense of flow happening. Boom. Right. And here's where, you know, like this is where you have to think about like what's important here in terms of the sketch. Right? Is it, I feel like adding a bit more structure to this be a good idea. Some extra things here that we can consider that will help us tell the story of depth. These are super, you know, this is basically barely even drawing at this point, just putting in mushy shapes. Let's put in a few again. So I like the idea of the fire for some reason. I'm sort of set on that. And I think a lot of that is just because I know how hard it is to get sort of drama and, you know, have some sort of light and dark things there. So, you know, the more experience you get at this, the more you kind of realize, oh yeah, no, we're going to need to have some stuff there that that kind of, you know, breaks this up, because otherwise it's going to be super boring. What do we got here? Big old globby hand. We got a globby hand here. Had that thing. I've kind of lost this shape here. Right, this is kind of his knee. This is kind of his hand here. I like the idea of these kind of like little, sort of blobby little hands, little kind of pudgy hands. Again, all of these ideas are things I've used before. Not trying to break any boundaries doing these kind of demos, as I've stated before. Little fingers here. What's he thinking? So this, again, is like a sort of a go-to style of illustration that I often sort of use. And it is really based on just two characters kind of meeting each other and us kind of wondering, like, who are they? Like, why are they there? What are they doing? Why are they doing the things that they're doing? Boom, boom. Yeah, a bit of sort of shadow here. Might help us again if we can kind of build the shadow into the composition. That will kind of help. All right, a bit of shading. I mean, we're pretty much done with this. There's not much else we can kind of really push with it. Now, again, I probably want to leave this till the next stage to really figure out like what's going on. Boom. Yeah, we could think about adding some extra little bits and pieces. Anyway, you sort of get the idea of where I'm going with this. Boom, boom. There we go. So yeah, again, not a thumbnail, but you can certainly scan it, right, turn it into one. Yeah, I think that kind of works all right for the purposes I had. So yeah, let's try to do a few more sort of quick ones, and we'll look at sort of what we've got. So I do apologize for times where I'm kind of like not in frame or whatever. I'm still perfecting this setup, and I'll figure out how to make sure that I'm always sort of in frame here, and making sure that always able to see exactly sort of what's on screen. Do apologize because I know a few times I've sort of been drawing stuff that's not on screen. All right. What else are we going to do? I think it might be cool, again, like I'm sort of, I want to sort of, there's a couple of things we sort of talked about, but, you know, I think it would be cool to play with the idea that, you know, let's see if we can make the monster a little bit more interesting or a little bit more sort of creepy, right? These are things that are always good to explore. So let's think about just drawing some different types of monster, right? Maybe some kind of trolls, or something that's a bit more like a sort of a rock creature. Again, this could go extremely badly because we're sort of doing, like, it's typically not a good idea to do concept design and this at the same time, because it can easily go very, very pear-shaped very quickly. But yeah, I think maybe some monsters might be a good thing. I'm thinking about how we can really frame the action. I think some stuff that makes it a little bit clearer. Maybe you're in a dungeon. Yeah, no, I'm not really feeling any of that. Right, again, character here. It's always good to block out the space, right? Character here. So I still like the idea of a these big kind of noses and stuff. But also good to think about some asymmetry into these designs, right? Let's see if we can zoom up. Asymmetry. Not a fan of that pencil. That's not working. Bit hard. Again, let's go back to our idea of the torch. Right. Let's think about form. Got a leg here. Right. Got an arm here. head here. Again, still not feeling like there's a good sense of sort of option here, or whether I'm really sort of pushing things in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, thinking more like a kind of a rock troll or something like that. Trying to get some more fantasy-esque feel to the way this is looking. Oh, out of time. Right, hand here. Shoulder pads here. That's not going to work, because we use the backpack to really define the space. Boom. Yep, sorry, going quiet, trying to think my way through this. Not necessarily at, again, we're sort of making things a little bit more generic, but again, all the ways that these characters are sort of holding swords is probably completely wrong from an actual realistic point of view. Just trying to get a cool angle on it. Let's go back to there so we can kind of see where we're at with it. Let's think about some foreground, middle ground. Again, I like the idea of this sort of arch as a simple way to kind of communicate right about sort of where we are, and also, you know, the idea of some sort of pillars or something like that is a good way to think about what's going on. But I'm feeling with this one again, like, you know, we're kind of stuck back with those same ideas. Oh. I feel like maybe this is about mouth open or something. But again, probably normally what you'd be doing if you were, because this would be getting on in the day, you would not be trying to push this. You'd just be like, let's just do a few. Right? Like let's try not get too creative. Whereas this is the danger, because I'm sort of doing this as a demo and I'm like, well, we've got to try and find something interesting. To draw. But yeah, maybe we just weren't. Again, you always got to remember that we're sort of viewing this as like, it is a collection of different ideas, and I've got a few there that I think are sort of good, and this one just might not be the best, but that's okay. The last one doesn't need to be the best. Bonk, bonk. Few flying things that help us settle the scale. All right, so we got this here, and this is coming down. All right, we're gonna have something like that, something like that. All right, we got this kind of line. All right, again, let's see if we can make some structure out of this. Again, we can think about some rocks flying up. I mean, I think probably like the ultimately the idea here that's I guess the most interesting is the concept of, you know, encountering something, you know, and the rock kind of comes alive, right? That's your sort of classic thing here. So it could be just a matter of, right, like building in more of those kind of dynamic moments, right? Like the rock, right? Like the character has literally just kind of come out of the ground, right? And maybe it is just a matter of, you know, maybe we can have some ambiguity about what's actually happening with the arm, etc. Because of that. So again, it's just an idea. I feel like I'm not necessarily entirely sure we're gonna get there with it, but I think if we again put the effort into, you know, at least defining it as an idea. I mean, I think this sort of thing is better, more interesting than some of the other sort of encounters we had. And this can be something you need to do, you know, if you sort of feel like, yeah, you know, like none of those were really, you know, they weren't really doing it, hey? Weren't feeling like enough was happening, or it was kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyway. probably needs a bit of clarifying with tone, I think. Boom. There we go. So yeah, again, we probably need to clarify some of this. Really sort of make it clear, because we got this character that's kind of against the foreground, but they're also lit here, so I'm not sure how that is going to work. But yeah, right, walking through your dungeon, the floor explodes, right? I feel like this is a, you know, common sort of fantasy trope. Good to kind of explore that kind of stuff. Right, let's define the extremities of where this character is. Yeah. So again, you know, to me, when I look at a lot of these, you know, I feel like this is, you know, to me, this is too rough, right? Like we haven't actually solved most of the actual problems that are here. Like we've sort of got some interesting ideas, but I think we need to go a lot further to really figure out whether, you know, an idea like this is gonna work or not. You know, it's like an interesting idea, but yeah, I think we need to clarify things a lot better. I mean, there's so many things about an illustration like this that really could go, will either sort of make it work or not work, right? You know, it's exactly how clear it is, you know, what's happening, the position of the arm, right? Here we've sort of got this arm that's kind of meant to be, right, sort of down here, but that's a little bit unclear, but probably with color, a lot of that stuff would clarify. Yeah, but yeah, maybe it's just a matter of keeping it simpler, thinking about all those different elements. But yeah, I mean, I think this type of image, you would need to do another few passes on it and really make sure that kind of works. But, and again, not entirely sure what's happening with this kind of face. But again, I think that's kind of fine. But this is something where I would probably pitch it as, if we want to do something like this, then, you know, let me know, and I will, I'll do some extra passes, and we'll sort of really try and figure out what is going on there. And some things like that are tricky to really sell from a, you know, from a thumbnail point of view. You know, you're kind of sitting there like, you know, I kind of got this idea, but, you know, you probably need a bit more detail to really kind of make it work. Yeah, anyway, so let's see if we can come up with one last idea. All right, so let's think about, you know, kind of where we sort of haven't been before. We had this idea of the sort of the fire pit, and, you know, how this could really kind of be interesting. I feel like, you know, one of the obvious things where we kind of haven't played around with this is, you know, what if this character was coming out of the fire pit? So I think that could be something that's worth sort of playing around with. So let's experiment. Bump, bump. Good to think about scale. So I'm going to try and think about making these different elements much smaller. I think that's something that really worked about that kind of like one of those sketches that we had there. right? Got some kind of head kind of thing. And I like the idea of the sort of multiple arms. Again, there being some kind of thing that where maybe even we're not entirely, or maybe we don't even really see the face that much. I think that's kind of also a cool look. Just playing around with different looks. Yeah, one arm here, one arm here. Yeah, this one. Let's make this one still in there. So again, pretty particular sort of thing I'm kind of thinking of, right? Boom, boom. Again, sorry, not talking, going off into my own little world. Boom. Because again, you always got ideas in your head. The question is like, will it turn out? Right? Like, will we be able to sell it? Is it going to be any good? Okay. And again, the interesting thing about this particular sort of demo, right? Let's see if we can go on the side, because I feel like that's going to give us a bit of a better view on it. Yeah, the interesting thing about this particular type of demo is like, there's no going back. You cannot fake this, right? So it's all on the same page. So, you know, there's really no way to kind of be like, oh, here's an edit, you know. Or like, maybe I'll go back and do that again, but I'll talk a little bit better. Which is, again, as I've kind of said, this is sort of why I try not to do thumbnail demos too much, but I'm going to try to do some of them on the channel. But it's mainly because, again, sometimes when we've been going for a few hours and stuff, you tend to get kind of a bit subverbal, right? Like the more into flow I get, the easier it becomes for me to kind of just zone out and stop talking. And yeah, it's one of the challenges with this. I feel like that eye is too big. Yep, so here we've got our little our little finger. Right, he's kind of coming out here with these fingers. These ones have got this. Now what do we have here? Some kind of big axe or something like that. But again, I feel like let's not worry about that because I feel like we're probably going to have to crop it here anyway. So let's kind of think about where our character is. So again, character could be over here. Character could be here. I think over here kind of makes the most sense. Well, yeah, maybe this hasn't fully come out yet. Of this thing, whatever it is, the fire pit. But again, we can use the flames here to frame the character a little bit. Again, not sure what should be happening with this sword. Just gonna sort of make it feel a bit more video gamey, right? Like it's just a character sort of standing there, which is maybe not the most interesting narrative thing, but I think it kind of works for our purposes. All right, so here's this arm. Right here, we're gonna have this arm. And again, pretty simple idea. You know, we don't have to gild the lily, as it were, to really sort of sell this. And typically, again, like this is probably something that's sort of worth thinking about as you're sort of going through these. And I do apologize again for going a bit subverbal and kind of just zoning into things. But a good thing to pay attention to is that like this image here, I would say is like you notice how I'm sort of struggling to make it read, right? I'm sort of struggling to really get it to kind of do what I want. To me, that's a good indication that like the image is too complicated. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you sort of don't do it, right? It just means that you probably need to clarify it and simplify exactly sort of what's going on in your image. Whereas typically what I'll kind of find is that if an image that I'm working on kind of just works from the beginning a little bit more, that's like a much better indication of how good it is from a clarity standpoint. And I think that's something we can kind of see here, right? If we've got, right, like it's a bit, like it's even this, right, is a bit messy. But the basic idea is really simple. You know, I don't need to keep adding depth to it. You know, I don't need to go that far. can just kind of add these last few bits. And again, it sort of doesn't need as much of me fiddling with it. I think that's like a good indication to me. So, something that I'm always kind of looking for, I guess, is something where it kind of does tend to work a little bit better as just a little sort of silly sketch. Yeah, you know, there's sort of less that I need to fuss about with it. So again, not entirely sure what's happening with this character. Let's get a sharper pencil there. But yeah, you know, so you can see I kind of leave it a little bit. What's happening with these? But I'm sort of imagining there's like some little pyres and things that are sort of being abandoned, right? Bits and pieces. I could also play around with some spikes and things in the background. Who knows? But yeah, let's have a go at pushing some of the details a little bit, really sort of refining what's going on. And yeah, I don't think I'm going to get much from pushing the face anymore. You know, I feel like there's like an interesting little sort of weirdness here to it. Probably sort of like adding stuff is not going to help. In a similar way, you know, pushing the character, not really going to help that much either. Boom, boom. But yeah, you know, you kind of see, like, I feel like anyway, we can understand what this image is kind of about. And I think if you get it and you stage it simply in the beginning, that is a really good indication that, certainly from a concept perspective, like, the other thing is that, you know, from an illustrative perspective, maybe something like this one is going to be more interesting because it's more complicated. There's more things to play with. But if you're looking for sort of clarity, like, how do we communicate this thing like really easily? How do we just sort of get it working often? Yeah, pay attention to like how quickly and how easily you can get clarity into the image. You know, simple foreground, middle ground, background. This really doesn't even have much foreground. We probably need to add a little bit of that stuff to it, or, you know, we could also add some stuff to the, you know, to the background, maybe some sort of complexity or something like that back there. But yeah, you know, just very simple image. It'll probably work. Again, we've got lots of different elements that we can play with to help us. Yeah, but I think other than that, we're pretty much done. We have done 20. So yeah, again, we could keep pushing this, could keep sort of playing around, but we have done 20. And again, hopefully that gives you a rough idea of kind of how I would go about doing this exercise. And hopefully my journey has helped to give you a little bit of confidence if you kind of play around with this and, you know, you sort of do it yourself. I think the reality is that it does take a lot of effort, does take a lot of time. We're still pinging a couple of hours on this at least. So yeah, you know, this is probably like a 4-hour, like, you know, 3 to 4 hour sort of exercise. I would say if I was doing this myself, you know, I wasn't talking, wasn't doing anything, you know, I'd probably say this would be like a 3-hour thing. And that's like a lot of effort. You know, that's probably, I'd say, you know, these would definitely be like a 1-day deliverable. You know, spend some time in the beginning really sort of ideating, getting all the ideas down. And then maybe I'd spend the rest of the day, you know, if I was doing these with pencil, you know, we'd scan them in, clean them up, try and get them presented, etc. So, you know, this is going to take a long time. You know, we're sort of looking more at like sort of 15 to 20 minutes per little sketch. But again, even though I guess there was that sort of comment talking about like, oh, you know, these are too detailed, and that might be something that a lot of people are kind of thinking about. To me, again, I don't think they are too detailed. These are just sort of rough little sketches. And, the other thing is that even if it takes you like 15 or 20 minutes to do one of these little sketches, if you do a whole bunch of them and they turn out really well, like you have a lot. It's not actually that much time if you sort of consider it, right? If you, sort of say, oh, we're doing sort of 15 minutes, it means you're sort of getting like 4 done per hour or something like that, so it's like 5 hours. Like, yeah, that's like pretty intense, but, you do 5 hours of sort of like pretty intense work, and then you sort of clean them up the rest of the day. You got like a lot of pretty decent images that you can sort of work with, and that can be a good sort of baseline for how you ideate going forward with this idea, or whatever it may be. So anyway, I will probably start rambling incoherently because, as we were sort of mentioning as well, this really does fry your brain. This is the other thing to remember and just understand about doing these types of tasks is this will completely fry your brain. You're using a huge number of different faculties artistically, the drawing, the composition, you're coming up with new ideas. Is this good? Is this bad? Right? But ultimately, I think the important thing to understand with any of these quantity-based exercises is like, if you've done 20, you've succeeded. If you do 20 and we, clean them up a little bit, we present them, send them off to our client, then, they're going to at least have 20 things they can look at and say, look, none of these are good, but we appreciate the effort you've put in. Let's try going in this direction or that direction. And I think that ultimately is the goal, is to understand that like we've put our best foot forward initially, coming up with a large variety of ideas. And I think often what you'll find is, even if you're not like, hey, look, I found this sort of perfect one, you will have kind of often given your subconscious mind the food it needs, so that you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, of course, right? This is how I'm going to make it interesting. Or, these are all too complicated, and this means the idea I have is too complicated. So, maybe you need to simplify the idea, or, think about how you can make it more impactful, right? If they all had a particular feel, again, it gives you things to think about. So I think this is the thing to do. Create all the thumbnails, and then what we want to do is, kind of collate them all, give them a way for you to present them, step back from them, look at them, and kind of consider it. But anyway, thanks for joining me on this one. Let me know if you've got any other comments or questions, etc. down below. I do want to do another one of these sessions, but again, a little bit more where I could just free form, do whatever I want. And I think I have talked to people in the comments below about, previously about the idea of like, look, we'll do one of these where I'm really focusing on trying to make the ideas as good as I can. And that may involve a lot less talking. So that will be a fun thing to do. But other than that, let me know what you'd like to see next, and we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.